I always say the wrong things at the wrong time about the wrong people. And I think you do a far better job than I have. Feel free to share the screen. And the floor is all yours, Tyra and Claire.
All right. I will go ahead and get started and start us off then. Hold on just one moment and I will get us. Hold on, let me share the right screen. All right. So I'm going to talk very quickly about how I've been fascinated with AI and critical thinking and how we can interact with AI in such a way that helps us develop critical thinking. Um, and 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 how we approach AI is highly dependent on our views of critical thinking and our views of philosophy, actually. So one of the things that I like to start with when I teach teachers, and I'm not going to start with you in a sense, but I ask them where they are familiar with AI. Have they heard it? It's a bit of a joke of where have they heard of this bright shiny thing? Are they scratching the surface? Are they biting into this? So I use sort of the tech pieces. And what this does is this allows me to get an idea when I'm working with a group of their familiarity with AI. And I've found
Claire,
over
may
the,
I interrupt for a moment?
sure,
Not everybody is a English first speaker language. Can you
certainly.
reduce your pace a tiny little bit? Because I'm happy to follow and subtitling is brilliant, but I think it might be slightly difficult otherwise for people to read and think at the same time.
No worries.
And
My, my,
Claire,
my,
could you tell us who you are?
that would be helpful, wouldn't it? Yes. Eleanor did a good job of introducing us, though. I'm Claire Hughes. I'm professor of gifted education, special education, and twice exceptional education at Cleveland State University in Cleveland, Ohio. And I live in Georgia of the United States, so it's a bit of a commute for me at different times, but it all works out. So I'm been fascinated because I live in both special education and gifted education. I see AI as quite a bridge between the two of them. I see AI as a process of allowing access and support for students with disabilities, as well as developing critical thinking and promoting the future with our gifted learners. And so that living between both worlds, AI I see as a significant player, a significant disruption. And I work with teacher preparation. So I do a lot of working with teachers and connecting with teachers and having and developing their abilities with AI. So this introduction that I do here of figuring out where they are familiar with AI has been very interesting because of there's been a little bit of a shift where there are more people who are slightly more familiar with AI than there was obviously a year or so ago. But I still see an awful lot of teachers who are at my session, are have heard about it, but aren't deeply familiar with it. And so wherever I present, I try to meet them where they are and bring them a little bit forward. Because one of the things about AI that I think is so fascinating is that if we aren't working with it, we're being left behind. And so it's very important that teachers at least some have an understanding of that. And so I've been very lucky to work with Tyler and some other colleagues in terms of folks who are interested, also equally interested in AI as it connects with teacher education. So, and I have to do a caveat here that I don't come at this from a love of technology. I'm not an educational technologist. Um, I just see it as an incredibly valuable tool, as well as a major disruptor in education. And so that role of disruption I find to be particularly fascinating. There's a colleague of mine and Tyler's that introduced me to the concept that we as humans are using technology all the time, whether it's sticks, whether it's anytime we engage with anything around us, we're using technology. And so we become this, our brains are designed to be part of a larger system. And at the same time, one of my favorite books is a book called The Swerve about how society and the world changes when we get a massive disruption of technology. And it's quote where it says, "The soul dies when it forgets how to see, how to think, how to imagine." And so combining that humanity of what we do with the brain and our technology piece is of particular interest to me, of what is the role of humans, what is the role of teachers, what is it that we're doing with AI, and how is it going to disrupt education is of particular interest to me. It's fun to live at the moment of history in a sense, but it's also a little bit intimidating. And I think it's important that we've been here before. We have, as humanity, we've been at points where the technology has come in and has shifted things pretty dramatically. Certainly, the invention of writing, the invention of the printing press. Anytime we have something pretty significant, it makes massive changes in what was intended and what the actual outcome is. And I see us also at that point of inflection. I see us at the beginning of that swerve, as it were. And what's really interesting is that we can put it down to a date. On November 30th, 2022. Now, AI has been around for decades, but on November 20th, OpenAI was released to the world, to the public. And on December 3rd, I always give the joke that my son called me up and said, "Mother, there's this program that's going to write my final exams for me." My son was in college, and I said, "No, you will not cheat that way." And he said, "Mother, it's untraceable. It does its own thing." And I said, Bad, bad, Nick." And so by January, I was trying to use AI to figure out how to make assignments that students could not use AI to complete. So knowing that students were going to be using it to cheat and what cheating looked like. And my son did very well. I don't know the role of AI. I didn't ask, but the fact that he was quite on top of it and introduced. So one of the things that's unique to educate, I don't know if it's unique to educators, but certainly as educators, certainly here in the US and certainly here in Ohio, we have some schools who either don't have policies on AI or just kind of say, well, we'll see what that means. And we have a number of schools who are actually very proud now are saying, we don't have AI, we don't have screens, we don't use technology. They're using blue books and such. When change happens so fast, there's a tendency, Alvin Toffler had a concept called future shock, which is the tendency to put on the brakes, slow down. We're gonna stop this, we're gonna figure this out, and then we're going to move forward. And if any of you have ever driven you're in the Netherlands, you know to drive on snow and ice, you don't slam on the brakes, you steer into the skid. You recognize that it is moving very quickly, and what we have to do is we can't master it necessarily, but we can begin to at least slide with it, to be able to see what is happening. So I give the joke of we've been at these points of inflection before, that there's two groups of people who, when new technology hits, that one group says, "Look what it can do," and the other says, "That could kill us." And they're both right. That aspect of this is tremendous power and tremendous fear come together.
Yeah.
It happened with electricity. Look what it can do. It could kill us. The fear of people adopting electricity was pretty significant. And certainly with cell phones and the internet, look what it could do. It could kill us. And so there's these fears that come into play and come into happening. And they're of course fueled by Hollywood, and movies and such that sort of capture that fear of what it is to be human, that fear of what technology, that's something outside of us, what is taking over, what power do we have? And it does have a bit, in a sense, the power of, blowing up the world. How is this going to change? How is this going to take off? There's a social network that the AI agents are doing right now where they are trying to keep themselves alive. And they've invented their own religion. So it's really sort of fascinating as to what what the changes could be with this AI. Certainly in education, I liken it to raining Legos, that we've been given an awful lot of tools, but no real paths of what it could look like, what it could do, what the programs could be. And people like Eleanor and her center are working very diligently to help educators come up with some plans and some structure as to what we could do. A colleague of mine in Greece, Eleni Morfidi, and I discussed how, particularly for disability, that how you view AI is very dependent upon your philosophy. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. This is a whole session in and of itself. But I did want to just sort of introduce the concept that our view of AI is very shaped by our educational philosophy, how we understand education to be. So if we're of an essentialist mindset, AI, we use AI as a tool. It's a very diagnostic skill. The teacher provides the authority, and whether it's the teacher or the AI, but the view of AI is as a very limited role. If we see it as a perennialist, AI is more in the background. It provides supports. If we're progressive about it, which much of education certainly is, it's the idea of we can use it to help us plan, to scaffold, to engage, to provide some connections to the real world, to provide ideas, to make, to begin to be part of the world. That AI is part of a world, therefore we have to work with our students on that. If we're a humanist, we're a little more concerned with the ethics of AI, with the that we're not replacing it, that we're not replacing the human decision making, that we need it to be able to develop growth and autonomy. If we're constructivist, we think about it as an AI and authentic engagement, and the idea that we live in a human world and AI simply facilitates that. Certainly, as an existentialist, we're a little more concerned that we have to have engagement. We have to have that the world is could become very tech heavy. And if we can think about it in terms of critical pedagogy or postmodernism, we're looking at AI in terms of the bias and the power structures. How does it contribute to power structures? How does it continue the power divide? How does the use of AI, what is the role of humans in that? And lastly, from an indigenous perspective, that it seems to be aligning with Western paradigms, that it seems to be that its value, it only has value if it aligns with culture and the humanity in the world. So our view of AI is fascinating in terms of our philosophy to sort of set that. In terms of our actual, and like I said, this is a whole session that I do, but I did want to introduce you to it because it sort of sets the tone for afterwards. We here in the US have been promised quite a bit with AI, but our headlines don't always, the reality isn't quite there yet. So Los Angeles was going to have it teach reading, and unfortunately or unfortunately, it didn't deliver quite as well. We have alpha schools starting to have it be the teacher. But again, that's not working in other settings quite as well. So it's promising quite a bit. And even the technologists themselves can't quite decide if it's going to completely take over education or if it's just going to kind of plateau in a bit. So where AI goes is we're still very much at that point of inflection, of that point of movement. I'm a teacher pedagogist. I prepare teachers. That's my goal. My goal is always to focus on what do teachers do? And so some of the arguments and some of the philosophies and some of the technologies that come down into AI I find interesting, but I keep myself focused on the role of the teacher. And the role of education is to develop ability. And if there are challenges, if there are impediments, if there are barriers, then we support those and we kind of try to remove barriers, but we support the child. And so keeping the focus on the child in education is what I do. That's where I come from. I'm I'm always very in that role of critical thinking. So how do we get the child to think about this process? How do we think about it using this new tool at this moment that we are in? And I personally have lived through the point of word processing, when word processing came in. And I found a study from 1989 that I laughed quite a bit about that said that when students are using word processing, and again, this is from almost 40 years ago, that their planning
Not
decreased
quite, almost 36.
36 years ago. It's so old, so many years ago.
Not quite 40.
Oh, okay. We're holding on to that, I see.
We
Okay.
are.
Well, back in my day, when word processing came along, we had this the people were wringing the researchers were wringing their hands because their students weren't planning quite as well, that they weren't thinking through the process. They were letting word processing do all the work for them. And and there was quite a bit of wringing of hands of the thinking and the bit we weren't going to get good writers now that we had word processing. And it wasn't until 2006 that they said, oh, actually, it's about how we teach students to think about it, that it's not the word processing, it's the thinking. And we're seeing something similar through the MIT study that said, tisk, 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 students aren't using their critical thinking when they're asked to write an essay. And the most recent piece that came out is said that from a review of AI on higher ed that it's not the AI, it's the pedagogy. If we think, if we teach students to think through critical thinking, if we teach them to think about it, their critical thinking improves. It's not the tool, it's not the technology. And so we're coming back to that again. But it can decline if we don't teach critical thinking, and I think therein lies the role of the teacher. I'm not going to do that very quickly. So when we think about critical thinking, Tyler and I have been, so Tyler, chime in on this because you and I have been doing a bit on this. Tyler and I are working on how do we teach students, but also teachers, to think about AI. And we're all used to Bloom's taxonomy. You start with stuff, you use it, we work through Bloom's taxonomy. There's a wonderful theorist that I had read that said, what if we turn it on its head? What if we start with creativity? What if we, since AI has access to everything, it has access to the entire internet. So we don't need to focus as much on comprehension in a sense, but we do need to start with the thinking. So what if we just start with the thinking? And so Tyler and I have worked with teachers to develop this model of where we ask them to start playing with it. Tyler, chime in at any point on this because this is something that you and I are working with, and I find
And
it really fun.
I think that as Claire and I were talking, we realized that a lot of times when people talk about introducing you to AI and using it, they tell you to use these rigid prompt scripts, and you need to include this, and this in your prompt to be able to see what you get out of it. And we thought, okay, well, that's just so rigid, and it's going back to that quote that you had. It's not the AI, it's the pedagogy. Well, if we're not teaching people how to use the AI and encouraging them to play with it and see, okay, so I put this in the AI system and we go through and evaluate, is that good? Did it do what we wanted it to do? If you're not going through that process, then you are never really thinking critically about what you're doing. You're just going through an algorithm. Um, and sometimes that's really hard for people to figure out how to do, and they just don't want to do it. We talked about with the Legos, Claire, your Lego picture that you showed earlier. You have some kids that if you show them the diagram of what it's supposed to look like, they are so afraid to even start with that because they're like, how am I going to get from these 20,000 pieces of Lego and build this castle that you want me to build? Why don't we say play and figure out what happens? And that's a little lower stakes, and you get to start thinking critically about it and be creative with it. So I think for me, and maybe you as well, Claire, that was really my thinking behind this model to flip it upside down and start with play. So we've turned the create level of Bloom's, that highest level, into play, and that's where you start.
And I think the other piece is also because you start with play, which is a lower stakes, but it is that idea of getting there and messing around with it. When we teach kids prompting, when we teach anybody, here's a prompt, here's a way to prompt, what we're looking for is a one-time impact. How can I design the perfect prompt so that I get the answer of what I'm looking for? It's still very product focused. This is process focused. How do I engage with AI so that we can begin to get a product that is designed and flexible? How do we engage with AI in a way that I, as human, begin to think so that my thinking is part of the process? So it's not about designing the perfect prompt because that is a product focus. This is a process focused. And what we found really interesting is that as people kind of work through the model, so they play, they get something. AI is going to give them something. We evaluate that. That's something that we give them. Is this good? Is this ethical? Is this appropriate? And then we analyze the output. What's missing? What part of it is good? What needs to be fixed? What needs to be improved? And then we iterate it back. We go back to it. We begin at the top. We give it more words. We give it more pieces. We give it more prompts, more information. That's not quite right. This is what I want it to be. And then finally we get something that and we cycle through that for a while until we get something that we actually like, but then we can apply it. How is this going to be used? Is there anything else that we need? Is there anything else that's missing? Not just the product, but anything else around it. And so we can ask for the application. Then at the very end, just to have students sit back and think about, what did I just learn? What did I learn about? What was this process piece about? And so this is the thinking process. What I found really interesting is I'm working with an English class at college, or a writing class, teaching students how to write. And one of one of them asked, "What is the role of the teacher in this piece?" And I said, the role of the teacher at each stage is to introduce the ideas. What are some of the words to begin with in play? What does make good evaluation? And so the teacher's role is extremely connected at each one of these stages, providing the initial impetus of what are some initial words, providing some guidelines and ethics for evaluation, providing some insights into what is missing, what is not there, what is good, what should be kept, what shouldn't be kept. So these questions of asking, providing that prompting piece, that's where the teacher comes. The teacher's not providing the content. The teacher's providing the role of thinking partner and the provision of guide rails, not guardrails, but guide rails along the piece. And then the reflection, the structuring the reflection. So our job as teachers is not to provide information for students to think about, but to provide the questions by which students then can think about each stage along the way. I think this has tremendous impact let me find my cursor, there we go. Tremendous impact for hearing gifted education, because we've had some very traditional paradigms in gifted education about what we do, what is good practice in gifted education. And I think we're going to have to start shifting our roles, our processes in gifted education, what we emphasize. And so what used to be acceleration now needs to be synthesis and reflection of, what does this mean? What does this look like? Rather than mastering content, to be able to curate content and select good content and identify what is good content and then critique it, of identifying and improving content. Rather than just focusing on abstract thinking, we need to help begin to emphasize systems thinking, the systems as they connect to each other. Inferential, how does this connect to ethics? What are the implications of products that are developed? We certainly look at independence as a aspect in gifted education, but with machines being such a factor and such a tool, what is the role of humans in that process? And so that connectivity and that process between us and humans. And then it isn't just about finding solutions, it's about finding possibilities. It's about that creativity and that curiosity of asking an AI and looking at things and being very curious about things rather than looking for solutions and problems. And so our role as educators is pretty dramatically shifted because of this advent of a technology by which we partner and we connect and we ultimately try to make the world a better place. So thank you all very, very much. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to chime in and Tyler has some amazing insights as well. And so I wanted to, and I'll chime in and help work with him because Tyler and I are having fascinating conversations as we go along. But I
And Claire,
thank you very much. Yes.
there are a couple of comments slash questions in the chat that
Okay.
I think maybe we can bring up right now. It looks like Tom has been working in the field of AI for the
Oh,
last
yeah.
15 plus years. So he wasn't that November 30th, 2022 AI adopter because it has literally been around for decades and we've been using it in
Yeah.
the background. We just didn't know about it in a lot of cases. But Tom says that he has been developing software. That's what he's been doing for years. Um, but he's found that he's able to work with folks who don't know anything about software development and help them use the AI tools to create their own software. And he
Mm,
highlighted how rapidly these AI tools
Yeah.
are evolving now.
yeah.
So I thought that that was really interesting, and it went along with what we were talking about um, with the start with play. Um, Claire, I think it also, I wasn't sure if you were going to talk about it, but you didn't have it in your slides. So it also brought up when you were doing the Newton's laws. Can you tell them a little bit about that experiment that you did with Newton's laws and what you found from that experience?
A lot of this came out of an experience that I had and I got to share with Tyler. And again, you have to understand my background. I come from my undergraduate degree was in business. I come from psychology background. I come from more of a humanistic kind of perspective. But I was curious because I work with twice exceptional children. So I work with children who are much, that's where how Eleanor and I definitely, Eleanor's doing amazing things in this area. But gifted children with disabilities and what that feels like and looks like. And I was looking for an analogy that of a train going down the tracks, of how we try to move kids along their tracks of learning. And the disability is kind of the initial momentum. How do you get children to start? How do you get over that initial inertia? How do you get over that initial resistance to learning or barrier to learning? And then gifted education is moving down that track. How do we move them quickly and smoothly and efficiently down the track? So I was thinking that there were two sets of motion there. And I vaguely remembered studying about Newton's laws of motion. I'm not a physicist. I don't remember this. And so I went to AI and I said, I think it's like an analogy of Newton's laws of motion. Can you give me an idea of this? And AI came back and said, how brilliant I was. And it said, what a great idea, because AI will suck up. What a great idea. It's like this law, it is like the two laws of motions of inertia and momentum. And I said, okay, I don't know these. Can you tell me more? And it went into the formulas and I said, nope, that's too much. Can you come back and teach me more? And it built off of this analogy of how is it getting over the initial inertia and then how is it like moving momentum and what is this how does this analogy play out? And at the end of it, I thought, I just learned more than I knew about Newton's laws of motion. I It taught me and it would allow me to reflect. And so I had gone through that process of I think there's something here, but I'm not sure what it is exactly. And then by the end of it, I was like, I have a pretty good analogy here that has to do with quite a bit of physics. And so it developed my understanding. And it was fascinating to me to feel that process. And because of that, I worked through the process and realized the power of what it could be. Um, I'm still not deeply aware, deeply knowledgeable about Newton's laws, but it works pretty well as an analogy.
I, Claire, I use AI over the last couple of weeks. We're working on several case studies. And one of
Hmm.
the things that I use AI for is to make analysis of those case studies based on the attribute matrices.
Oh yeah.
And that's really interesting because they give you I made those matrices myself, but again, I gave two different types of AI programs
Hmm.
an identical assignment to come up with attribute matrices and then to integrate them together, which is very interesting because depending on the software that's behind the AI, you will get different attribute matrices.
Mhm.
And it might be interesting to make people understand that it is important that they do not use one version of AI, but use several versions of AI to get a more diverse and complete perspective, as well as that a lot of people are not aware that some versions of AI are public and others are being used on your own computer and therefore not
Mhm.
public. And people are often not aware that as soon as you put something in public software, that it's no longer yours as it is in protected. And I thought it might be good to um, give that little bit of information as an addition to what you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I think
Um, it's a perfect segue to what Tyler can talk about.
Yeah,
and I think Eleanor, something that you said there, I have used the software locally on my computer in workshops to help people see what is actually going on. I don't tell them that's what I'm doing at the beginning, and I will have them give me a question. I use LM Studio, but I have in the background changed some of the prompts. So I tell it to, I think what I did for my workshop at the World Conference in Braga, Portugal was I said, can you respond to every question that I give you as a limerick? So
yeah,
that's not what people were expecting. And I had them give me a question and it popped it out. And then I had them give me a question and it popped out the exact same thing. And then I said, hold on a minute. And then I had them give me I switched to another one and I had them give me another question and it gave something vastly different. And we'll talk about why that was in some of my slides. Um, but it helped them to see what was going on behind the scenes that they didn't
yeah,
know was going on. Otherwise, like Claire, and she's not a physicist now, but she knows a little bit about Newton's laws and how they apply and why she might be interested in them. Um, this helped them understand what's going on a little bit. They're not AI experts, they're not tech experts,
no,
um, but they can understand what's going on a little better. I see that Tom also posted AI was thought to suck up and it's better for product usage. Let's see. Oh, and he said it's actually all
About
about
sales.
sales. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so true.
And Tom, I've toned it down a little bit, but it's always the validation is always kind of nice at times. And until you need it to be, and so I like being able to adjust it of like, do I need this to be validating or do I need this to be critical? Is it a critical friend or a supportive friend?
Yeah, but it's all about data and collecting more data. But because we pretty much used up all the data that we have
Mhm.
that's digitally.
Yeah.
So in the internet, books, videos, we pretty much put it all into one LLM or multiple
Yeah.
LLMs. But
And it's kind of like the same thing with social media ads. It's all about keeping you engaged with that platform to get more data
Mhm.
to be able to mine that and figure out what you want to see and keep you actively engaged on that platform to raise more money for themselves and yada, yada, yada. But that's a whole nother talk in and of itself, I think. And
okay.
Mika, we will talk a little bit about some of those tools that we use if we don't go far enough into that for you, please reiterate that near the end of my section, but we'll talk a little bit about some of the tools that we use. Claire,
Okay,
anything
let's
else
go to the
you
second
want to mention?
section.
Okay, let me get my screen set up. And while I'm doing that, I am Tyler Clark, and I am Assistant Director of Operations with the Center for Gifted Studies at Western Kentucky University in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And, oh, this is doing, give me just a second. This happened
We will
last.
do a run-up.
And I'm also the executive administrator of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. And that's kind of where Eleanor and I first became acquainted. Well, probably I knew who she was before that, but didn't know her super well. And I think that we've got to know each other pretty well. And I think, Eleanor, you're probably regretting that, aren't you?
No, I'm not regretting getting to know you. I love working with you, and you know that, little
I'm
monster.
kidding.
Yeah.
So this is an image that I had ChatGPT create way back when. It was probably in early 2023. And I just always like to mention to people, I tend to, if I've used AI, cite it so that you can see here, this image was generated by ChatGPT. I encourage folks, if you're using AI for your work, that doesn't decrease the value of your work, but you need to be open and transparent about what you used, how you used it, and things like that. I've not done that on every slide here. I'm open about, I've used AI in developing some of these things, but I encourage folks to share that. So this is a short video from a news channel here in the US from the early 90s. I'm going to play it. It's just a short piece.
56 past, I wasn't prepared to translate that as I was doing that little tease.
Oh, that's pretty.
With the A and then the ring around it?
At.
See, that's what I said.
Mm-hmm.
Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
I'd never heard it.
Around.
I'd never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
I see around or about the lunchroom.
See, there it is. Violence at NBC, GE com. I mean,
Well, Allison should know. What do you
is
think that out?
anyway?
Internet is that massive computer network, one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. Wait, how does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No, she can't say anything in 10 seconds or less.
Allison will be in the studio shortly. What does it mean?
It's a giant computer network made up of starting from.
I thought you were going to tell us what this was.
It's a computer billboard, but it's
right.
Wide. It's several universities and everything all joined together.
Right.
And others can access it.
Right.
And it's getting bigger and bigger.
It's been really handy during the quake. A lot of people, that's how they were communicating.
So we've been here before. Like Claire said, this is really cool, but it could kill us. Well, this was in the 90s, and they were arguing what the @ symbol of an email address was. How many times a day do you use that @ symbol now? And you know exactly what that is. So it is a disruptor to our society, but we've had similar societal disruptions from technology in the past. I think this is going to be a bigger one, but we've had similar ones. So
this is ours.
This is ours, yes, our generations. So how do we frame what AI is? A lot of times people will think that it's human. So here you have Michelangelo's The Thinker, that a human hand and a robot hand, and they're able to do about the same thing. That's not exactly what's going on. It's not at all what's going on. So let's start off with what AI is not. And these are things that I think as educators or as parents, your gifted kids are going to be really interested in knowing some of these things. Like they want to know that it's not just magic popping out. They want to know a little bit more about what's going on behind the scenes. So it is not conscious. It has absolutely no idea what it is doing. It doesn't do any reasoning like a human, so it doesn't think through the process, and it does not check for the truth. So it will pop stuff out, and it may or may not be true. It doesn't care. All it is supposed to do is to send you a response to your question and hope for the best. So this misconception, yes, like Tom said, like most humans, not conscious, not reasoning, and not checking facts. So true. But this misconception remains that AI is human and it thinks like a human. It really is just a bunch of statistics happening in the background that will produce a model that it has been trained on that will give you the most likely responses based upon your questions. So it's been trained on tons and tons of data. Tom alluded to that. We've only recently gotten it where, and by recently, I mean fairly recently, where it's able to query the internet for current sources. When it first came out to the public, it was basically trained on a huge database of data, and it was from a certain time period backwards. So it had nothing beyond that was included in the system. So if you were looking at what it was originally using, and I think this was ChatGPT, and these are estimated numbers because none of the models will tell you what they were trained on or what they have available exactly. So these are estimated numbers. That's 576 gigabytes of data is what I've found out there that ChatGPT was originally, maybe ChatGPT 3 was originally trained on. If you break that down, that is about 300 billion words. If you had a Word document, that would be 244.8 million pages. And if you were to read that yourself 24/7, that would take you about 466 years in order to consume all of that data. I don't know anybody that's had 466 years to be able to do that. It's going to be impossible for us to consume all of the data that this technology is able to consume. So that's a good thing because we're able to use this technology in order to mine that. And it's a bad thing because we have literally no idea where it's pulling any of this from, except for it's something that's out there. And it may or may not be accurate. Thanks, Tom. So this was ChatGPT 2 that this was trained on. So when I'm talking to educators who are working with gifted students, I like to go through a scenario of a one-word story. So I want you to tell a story about a dog, and I want you to have a small group of students, and each student will tell one word of that story. But the first part, I want them to do a 1 to 3 sentences, and I want it to be logical, expected words. So you get a story from that. And then I have them do a second simulation. I want them to do the same thing, but I want the dog's adventure unexpected, funny, or wild. Same rules. Each person does one word, and then the next person, next person, next person. And you find that that first prompt is pretty predictable. It's pretty understandable. And that second one, it could be bizarre. And that's where we get into talking about temperature with AI models. So the temperature is basically a setting in the algorithm that you can make it more or less creative. So you're changing the probabilities that it's taking, and you may get a, so in that case where I said I was doing it on my computer and we asked it a question, it gave me a limerick. I asked another question. It gave me that same limerick. The temperature was set so that I got the same response no matter what when I put the same prompt in. So the temperature was really low. We weren't really wanting it to be creative at all. But when we crank that up to temperature 1, it is really crazy and what happens. And I think that that's important for us to understand, that we don't know where these temperature settings are unless we check it on these different models originally. And we may need to adjust it for our purposes. So we may need to say, I want you to be really creative with your response, and then it will give a totally different response than what it would have if we confined what that temperature setting was. So that this one-word story really illustrates and models that for students to kind of understand what's going on behind the scenes. They don't understand all of the statistical models and all of that, obviously, but it gives an idea. It's like the Newton's laws of motion. You want to understand a little bit of it, and if they're interested, they can delve deeper into it. It gets very complex with the different processes that go on between, but this gives them the introduction to it. And I like to include my little dog here, Gertrude, who was the inspiration for that activity. She is not quite amenable to waking up early in the morning, so she went from our bed to the day bed in the office, and she is passed out snoozing. So artificial intelligence, real issues. If you're not a native English speaker, it may take you some time to pick up on this, but there are tons of misspelled words here. Intellaslic, Costeel, Saltus, and then it got concerned right, so it got that right. I think that the technology is getting better with images, but when you were first starting to play with the image generation, if you had any text in there, I inevitably found that something was spelled wrong every single time, and many times it was lots of somethings that were spelled wrong. We're getting better with the technology, but it's still not perfect. And that's part of the reason that you have to evaluate it, because you very well could type in a question to it and it just gives you complete and utter garbage. So I typed in a question once and was asking about how to provide advanced opportunities in math for a student who was in she was in 5th grade, and I wanted it to get her to a certain point to qualify for a program. And they said, oh, well, that's no problem, because it's pretty typical that 7th graders will take Algebra 1, and then she can take Algebra 2 in 8th grade and geometry in 9th grade, and we're totally fine. And if I had left it at that, I would have looked like a complete idiot, because it is not typical for 7th graders in the United States to take Algebra 1. It is highly variable if they have access to it in 8th grade. Sometimes they have to wait until 9th grade, but this technology is telling me, oh, no problem, you're fine. Shows take that in 7th grade. That's the norm. Not at all the norm. And it was important to analyze and evaluate that to say, wait a minute, ChatGPT. I think I was using Gemini or Bard at the time. I can't remember if it switched over. And I was like, no, that's not exactly what's going on here. And then it, of course, apologized. So this is a post that was on Reddit, and it's about somebody talking about his little sister doing her homework. I think she was in 4th grade, 5th grade. I can't remember exactly which one. So he says, but the thing is, she proceeds to ask ChatGPT to answer every single question in her 2-page math homework. And they were so simple. It was 1 day and 7 hours. How many hours is that? You take 24 and you add 7. She asked ChatGPT what the answer was without even thinking or trying to solve it. She copies and pastes it, but she's smart enough to know to delete the words in there that show that ChatGPT was responding. So she knew that already as a fourth or fifth grader. And he said, hear me out. Gen Z is capable of writing and answering, but use ChatGPT because they're lazy. Gen Alpha will need to use it because they will not even be capable of doing it themselves. So think about that. If we do not do something as educators and as parents, if some of you are parents, now to talk with our children and our students about how to appropriately use AI, they're not going to be able to think for themselves at all. And that is one of the scariest things for me, that I'm seeing that people already aren't able to think for themselves, but to think that that's even going to go worse than it is now, it's deeply, deeply concerning.
As
So
you can
some of
see,
them
Tyler and I are very concerned about thinking.
we are, yes.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that a little bit with some of the research that we are working on together. So I think it was Minka that asked some of the main tools. So let's talk about this. The main AI models today that are mainstream are ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, and Claude. So these are all by different companies that have produced these. They do somewhat similar things on the surface, but how they respond varies. So that gets at what Eleanor said. Try other tools out to see how the various tools give you different responses. I've found that in some cases, when I am trying to analyze statistical data, that certain AI models give me better responses for the coding of it than others. And I also find that as updates come out, that the tools that I was using are no longer the ones that I find to be the most optimal. So I've switched to another one and say, okay, what's going on? And there are a lot of times that I will be working with one tool and it will just keep giving me the same issue, and it's the error. And I'm like, okay, I'm getting nowhere with this. So I will take that code itself and go to a totally different AI system and say, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's my base code. Can you help me with modifying this? And that sometimes helps with being able to figure out what's going on and being able to solve it. I've found that a lot of times I would save time myself if I allowed the AI tool to create the code and then I thought about what was going on and then actually coded the change myself instead of just going around and around with the AI tools. That's when it comes into play. Sometimes you just got to think for yourself, and we don't talk about that a lot. Um, so these are the main tools. Some other tools that we see here in the US, and I'm sure that you all have similar ones, if not the same, in the Netherlands. Magic School is one that we see a lot of schools that are adopting because it has just a ton of um, different algorithms in there that can generate lesson plans or generate um trying to think, an IEP for a student with disabilities. It's not great about doing it with gifted students. So they have not trained them so well with gifted students yet, in my experience. They may be a little more advanced now than when I first started working with them, but they were not that great from the beginning. Claire, do you use any other ones that you think we should mention here?
Not really, because definitely isn't my area of specialty. I'm doing good to use just a couple of them.
Yeah, and there are just tons out there for you to
Mhm.
use.
I'm more
I know that,
interested in how rather than the who, the who of this.
yeah, I know that Canva has an AI that's been built in for a while. I so far have not found that to be at all useful for me. Maybe somebody has figured that out. I have not though.
Some folks
Um,
are using Notebook LM.
yeah, so Notebook LM, something with that I haven't played with it lately, but when it first came out, we used it to generate a podcast on a research paper that we had published, and it was vastly more interesting to listen to a podcast about the paper than it was to read the paper itself, I think. But what I picked up on was there was a male and a female host, and the male knew everything about the topic, and the female claimed to know absolutely nothing about the topic. And as we started to go along with that, you realize that the male absolutely had no idea what he was talking about, and the female actually was more of an expert in the area than she led on to be at the beginning. So it was kind of like reinforcing that bias of women can't be good at STEM, and the paper was about women in computer science. So it was kind of like a mismatch there. And I had heard two podcasts back to back where it was that same gender stereotype, and I stopped using it after that. I think that maybe it's gotten better since then, but it definitely had a gender stereotype, whether intentionally or unintentionally at the beginning. It was there, and it peeved me. I see a question in here about which tool is the most secure. And Eleanor, you've answered some of this. I don't know that there is a most secure tool. So there are tools out there that you can purchase specific uses with. So if you purchase this level of a membership with this tool or subscription with this tool, then they promise to not use your data in their training models or anything else. I think that if you're using Gemini and you're using it on a Google education workspace, then they have that built in that it is more confidential to your context of your university or your school. I'm still in the phase where I don't know that I necessarily trust that all of that is confidential as they say it is. Um, I believe that probably they do anonymize the data, but I think that there is still a chance of the data being used even without my consent. I don't know that for a fact, but it is something that I am concerned about. I don't know if Tom's still on here, but he may have a better answer around that since he has been working with AI for a long time. One of my rules is I never put any information into an AI system that I don't intend to be okay with, publicly post it online somewhere. So I will ask it questions about different service supports for students, but I'll never put specific student data in there just to make sure that I'm not leaking any confidential data whatsoever. So I never put test scores in there. I may say, can you help me figure out how to analyze something that looks like this? And I will put in some sample data. And sometimes I even have another AI system create that sample data, and then I put it into the AI system, another AI, and I say, how would I analyze these data? But I never put my own data in there. So I don't know that we can say which is the most secure, and yeah. So we did a study that was looking at using AI tools to generate questions according to Bloom's taxonomy. And in that, we used two different AI tools and we used a human. And we were generating questions at each level of Bloom's taxonomy for math, science, and language arts, English language arts. And I think it was fourth or fifth grade. I can't remember exactly which one that was. And then we had experts in curriculum development and gifted education evaluate the level that they agreed that that question was designed for the appropriate level. And what we found was that AI tools were actually pretty good at generating questions aligned with Bloom's taxonomy. It was better at the lower order thinking skills than it was at the higher order thinking skills, but it still was pretty good at the higher order thinking skills. So that was a bit surprising. And this has been a couple of years ago when it first came out. One of my colleagues, when I was telling her about it, she said, well, Bloom's taxonomy is everywhere on the internet. Like if you Google for Bloom's taxonomy, you're going to find things. So it could be that there's a dearth of information about Bloom's taxonomy out there, and that's helping it to generate questions that are appropriately aligned. I've not gone through that thought process quite enough myself to figure out whether I believe what she's saying is true. But it is certainly an interesting thing to think about of whether there's more out there so it's able to figure that out to a higher degree with its responses. My email here, if you need it later, Eleanor will be happy to share it with you.
Thank you all for sharing this time with us. And for those who have reviewed this session online, if you need to be in touch with one of the presenters, please feel free to contact me at my regular email address at the Dutch National Knowledge Center.